from the Sefer published by Sichos in English called Selections of Likkutei Sichos. It's the English translation of the Sicha and parts of Vayigash in Chelik Yud and Likkutei Sichos. As usual, the bold is the translation of the actual words. The not bold is the insertions for understanding. 1. On the verse, on the pasuk, and he fell on the neck of Binyamin, his brother, and wept. It says, "Vayipol atzavar Binyamin achi vayef," Binyamin bachal tzavarav, and Binyamin wept on his neck. Our Chazal, the sages, comment: Yosef cried for the two Batei Hamikdash, as alluded to by the plural form of the word tzavare, translated as neck. It doesn't say tzavar Binyamin. It says savare Binyamin. That meant that there was two things that he was crying about that would be built in the tribal portion of Binyamin, the Chelik of Binyamin, and later destroyed. Binyamin wept for the sanctuary of Shiloh, Mishkan Shiloh, that would be built in the tribal portion of Yosef and later destroyed. The Medrash explains why the neck is used as an analogy for the Beis Hamikdash when interpreting the verse, Kemigdal David Tzavarech, like your neck is like the Tower of David. Just like as the neck is the high point of a person's body, so too the Beis Hamikdash is located at the high point of the world. The expression at the high point of the world is not, however, to be interpreted literally. For as the Chazal, our sages, comment on the verse, Bein Kseif of Shochen, he shall dwell between his shoulders. The Beis Hamikdash is 23 amas cubits lower than the spring of Etam. And that's how the water got into the Beis Hamikdash, to the mikvahs, the Beis Hamikdash, because it came downhill from that spring. And the Chazal explained, just as a person's neck, though at a high point on his body, is lower than his head. On the contrary, when King David and Shmuel the prophet were seeking to determine the location of the Beis Hamikdash, they said, "Let us lower it a drop." In other words, instead of making it the highest most point, and why should they lower it a drop? For it is written, "He shall dwell between his shoulders, being safe of shochin." There's no more attractive portion of an ox than the place between his shoulders. According to this interpretation, at the high point of the according to this interpretation, at the high point of the world means among the higher points of the world. It doesn't mean the highest actual place of the world. So the Rebbe asks, on the surface, the above requires explanation. Why is not being at the highest point considered a positive virtue and attractive? And in Lashon Kodesh, it's called memonov. Why, if there is no advantage in height, why do our Chacham teach that the Beis Hamikdash is located at the high point of the world? And if height is a virtue, as implied by the Chachamim's comment, seemingly whatever is higher is more attractive or of greater virtue, why then is the Beis Hamikdash lower than the stream of Etam? If we're trying to get the attractiveness of being the height of the Beis Hamikdash being the greatest height possible. So the Rebbe goes on to explain the above questions can be resolved by explaining the function of the neck, which serves as a point of transition between the head and the body. A person's collective life energy rests in the brain and is transmitted to the body through the medium of the esophagus, trachea, and the veins in his throat. A similar pattern is found with regard to the transmission of the power of thought. The external dimension of the power of thought is drawn down from the brain to the heart, and from there its influence is spread throughout the entire body. This comes through the medium of the throat, a narrow organ that is imposed between them, in other words, between the head and the rest of the body. Thus, the neck possesses a certain advantage over even the head, for it is the neck and throat that make it possible for the head's purpose to be carried out, enabling two things. A, all the limbs to receive their life energy from the head, and B, another thing, is all of them to conduct themselves according to the power of thought lodged in the head. When the head and neck are considered are independently, in other words, we look at the worthwhileness or importance and value of the head versus the value of the neck, the head possesses an advantage over the neck. Therefore, even in a physical sense, it is higher than it, because even physically, the location of the head on the human being is higher even than the neck. This advantage, however, applies only to the order within a person's internal hierarchy. When speaking about the ultimate purpose and mission of the head, there is an advantage to the neck precisely because it is lower. Being lower enables it to serve as a point of transition and enables it to transmit vitality and the power of thought from the head to the body. Now we understand why the Beis Hamikdash is compared to the neck and not to the head. And the same thing, why is that part better? Similar concepts apply with regard to the Beis Hamikdash, which is described with the analogy of a neck. Its primary advantage is its slight descent from the foremost peak. For the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is to serve as a medium through which godly light is drawn down to illuminate the world. It's a vehicle, it's a channel that brings the head, the godliness, into the world. Even those elements of existence on the lowest levels, just like the neck, transmits all the life force and vitality from the head to the entire body. Therefore, the Beis Hamikdash was located on a high point, but not on the highest point. It was not elevated entirely from the world. Were that so, it would have been too lofty and could not have served as a medium to illuminate the world. It was therefore necessary to lower its sight a drop, to bring it closer to and into connection with the world so that it would illuminate it. This resembles a person's neck, because it is lower than the elevated station of the head and closer to the body, is able to serve as a point of transition between the two and join them together. The same is true regarding to the Beis Hamikdash, a microcosm that exists within every Jew, his godly soul. When a person's soul is not uplifted and exalted to the point of separation from his own private world, but instead is involved and clothes itself within it, enabling him to refine his animal soul, body, and portion of the world, his entire existence becomes a sanctuary for Hashem's light. Based on this, the Rebbe is going to introduce a totally new or a totally separate point about the crying, specifically why each one was crying for the others. Part 2. On this basis, we can understand why Yosef fell and wept on Binyamin's neck and Binyamin wept on his. One might ask, why did each weep on his brother's neck? Why didn't each weep on his brother's head? As is the primary and most elevated portion of a person's body, as we just now explained, the difference in the neck and the head, we'll see why. These questions can be resolved as follows. The Jew's ultimate purpose is described by our Chachamim, our sages. I was created to serve my Creator. That service involves the consummation of Hashem's purpose in the creation of each individual person and the creation of the entire spiritual cosmos, and particularly our material world, namely, Lasus loyis baruch dir b'tachtonim, or liyis loyis baruch dir b'tachtonim, to make a dwelling for him, a home for him in the lower realms. Everything is in the hands of Hashem, Hakol b'dei Shamayim, except for the fear of heaven, Chutz mir Shamayim. Indeed, fear is the beginning of divine service, its fundamental quality and root, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it's Reishis Avodah v'Ikra v'Sharsha. Hence, the consummation of Hashem's intent is dependent on the divine service of the Jewish people and each individual Jew. It is they who are entrusted with making a home for Hashem, a dwelling for Hashem in the lower realms, through each one refining his body, his animal soul, his nefesh habamis, and his portion of the world, what's called chelke ba'olam chassidus. Therefore, the fundamental element in these efforts, even with regard to the head, is the neck, which enables his service to be carried out as explained above. Hence, Yosef and Binyamin wept on each other's neck rather than head, for, first of all, there's no reason to cry over the head, because which is the soul of a Jew. Even when a Jew sins, that his soul is still faithful to God. There's nothing what to cry about the head. The head is always perfect of a Yid. B, the purpose of a Yid, of a Jew, is not reflected by his head, which is associated with the service of the soul for itself, but in his neck. The neck of the Jew indicates where the person needs to do his avodah, which relates to the soul's effect on the body. The nefesh habam is the animal soul and its portion of the world, as explained above. So therefore, that is what we are crying about. We are crying about the neck. Here he's getting to the part I mentioned before. The part is each one's. They didn't cry about their own neck. They cried on the neck of the other. Section number 3. Further explanation is nevertheless required. Why did Yosef weep over the Batei HaMikdash that were built on the chelik of Shevet Binyamin, on the tribal portion of Binyamin, while Binyamin wept over the Mishkan, the sanctuary built in the chelik of Yosef's Shevet, in the tribal portion of Yosef? Seemingly, each one of them should have wept over the destruction that would take place in his own chelik, in his own nachla, his own tribal portion. For ultimately, a person is close to his own self. That should be his first consideration, what he should be dealing with first. One's connection with his own self is so powerful that even with regard to the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, loving one's fellow Jew, even as great as the quality and extent of this love is, as explained in Chassidus, the command obligating this love is nevertheless love your fellow as yourself. Kamoicha is the emphasis, meaning only a comparison to self-love is possible. It's only like the person himself. It's not identical. One can never actually love another person with the same degree of love with which he loves himself. Indeed, the Geras HaKodesh in Tanya, where he talks about the great level of Avos Yisrael a person needs to have, in the same epistle, the same Geras that elaborates on the importance of generously increasing one's gifts to Tzedakah as an expression of kindness, our sages ruling that when a person has only one jug of water and needs it entirely for himself, he need not share it, for your own life takes precedence. The Chachamim are talking about a case where a person is traveling in the wilderness with someone else, and he only has one jug of water, and if they both drink from it, they will both pass away. So the person may drink the jug entirely for himself. And we don't say because the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, he needs to share it with someone else, because chayecha koidmim, the Chazal say. So we see that even in the most important mitzvah like Avos Yisrael, there still takes precedent the person over another. If so, going back to our case, therefore, both Yosef and Binyamin were certainly more concerned with their own sanctuaries, their own Batei Mikdash and Mishkan. Hence, their weeping seemingly should have been focused first on destruction of the sanctuaries built in their own portion. They should have been crying about their own instead of crying about someone else's Batei Migdash that was going to be destroyed. There's another point that requires explanation. On the pasuk, Vayipol Yosef al Tzavora, Vayev al Tzavora Oid, that Yosef fell on Yaakov's neck and wept on his neck excessively. The Zohar states that Yosef wept over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. In this way, the Zohar explains why he wept on his neck excessively. It says the word Oid. What's the word Vayev kol tzavor of Oid? What's that expression of Oid? Because the additional weeping was over the final exile, the final destruction, the final exile. On the surface, it is perplexing why Yosef alone wept over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, why Yaakov did not. Rashi, quoting Chachamim, the Chazal, explained that Yaakov did not cry because he was reciting the Shema. According to the Zohar, however, this explanation is insufficient to explain. Why is it insufficient according to the Zohar, but without the Zohar it would make sense? So he says, to explain according to the simple meaning of the above verse. Yosef was not crying because of the destruction. He was crying because of just not meeting his father after all these years. In that context, the explanation that Yaakov did not fall on Yosef's neck and did not kiss him because he recited the Shema emphasized the greatness of Yaakov's divine service, despite the fact that this was the first time he had seen his son. After so many years of thinking that he was not alive, he nevertheless did not interrupt his recitation of the Shema. Moreover, this awesome happiness did not prevent him from reciting the first pasuk, the first verse of the Shema, with focused attention, as the halacha requires, as it's required of the halacha, that when you say the Shema, one needs to be fully focused on what they're saying. That is all if we just read it in the simple meaning of the pasuk. But according to the Zohar, however, the question remains, since we're talking here about crying for the Beis HaMikdash, crying for the Beis HaMikdash should really not be ignored. The question remains, how is it possible that Yaakov was not overcome by emotion and not disturbed by the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? How is it possible for him to focus his attention on the recitation of the Shema at this time? Section 4. These concepts can be explained as follows. Regarding worldly matters, why does someone cry? To release tension and make himself feel better. As we see in actual life, when a person cries over a difficult and aggravating matter, the crying has no power to rectify the circumstances that prompted it. However, as reflected by the pasuk, "Hoisali demasi lechem yomim v'layla," my tears were like bread for me. Crying makes the person feel better. It releases his emotions. This leads to the conclusion that when a person has the potential to correct a matter, he should do what he can to correct it rather than calm himself by crying. When a person sees the destruction of a colleague's Beis HaMikdash, he shares their pain and cries. However, the fundamental correction of the problem and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash is not dependent on him, but on his colleague. He himself, he can, and indeed he is obligated to help his colleague by reproving him in a pleasant manner. He has to do the mitzvah v'chech techiach, B, arising divine mercy and praying for him, davening for that person. Nevertheless, actually negating the sins that cause the destruction of his colleague's Beis HaMikdash is dependent on his colleague, and that colleague has free choice. Therefore, when a person has done everything he can to help his colleague and sees that his colleague's Beis HaMikdash remains destroyed, his soul will be impacted and he will cry. All this refers to one's relations with others. When, by contrast, a person sees that his own Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed, he can't content himself with sighing and weeping. On the contrary, he must try to correct the situation and build anew by performing his avodas Hashem, his divine service, in a manner that brings about an individual experience of redemption within his own soul. The only exception is when the weeping comprises tears of tshuva. In that instance, the weeping itself is an act of improvement and building, as implied by the verse, Sima dimasi b'neidecha v'goymer, place my tears in your jug. That itself is a positive activity. It's not just releasing his pain or whatever. By contrast, ordinary weeping can at times weaken one's efforts to rebuild his own Beis HaMikdash, for he will think that he's already fulfilled his obligation by weeping. Let's go on to the next page. Accordingly, both Yosef and Binyamin wept over the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, the sanctuary that was in the other's portion. Yaakov, however, did not weep about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but instead recited the Shema. Yaakov is the father of the entire Jewish people, and thus both the Mishkan Shilai, the sanctuary of Shilai, and the Beis HaMikdash were in his portion. It's his problem, meaning relevant to him. Accordingly, by reciting the Shema, he was involved in correcting and rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. What does his recitation of the Shema have to do with correcting and rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash? The rationale is that the primary purpose of the Beis HaMikdash is to be a house prepared for karbonos, sacrifices to be offered. And whoever recites the Shema, the Chazal say, is considered as if he brought an oila, carbon oila, burnt offering, and a sacrifice. For the fundamental aspect of the sacrifices is expressed by an interpretation of the verse, and Adam ki yakriv mikem karm lavai. When a man from meaning among you offers a karm to Hashem, that the sacrifice must come mikem, from you. This is achieved through reciting the Shema and expressing Mesiras Nefesh, its spiritual counterpart, meaning giving over one's soul entirely. When reciting Hashem Echad, God is one, and we're reciting V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol nafshecha, love Hashem with all your soul, making a commitment to express that love, afilu noitlas nafshecha, even when one seeks to take your soul. So that is identical to the karbonos. So therefore, the Shema was about rejuvenating and causing that the avoid of the karbonos should be improved and brought back into this world, or not allowed for it to be destroyed. So now the Rebbe asks more of a practical question. But they saw already that was going to happen. What use is there to daven or work on it? So he says in 5, there's no room for the question. It was within the spirit of prophecy, with the spirit of prophecy, that Yosef and Binyamin saw the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed. Obviously, then, this had already been decreed from above. This already exedim in Hashemayim. So if so, what is there to do? Why do we say that they didn't cry for their own because they were busy rebuilding it? What benefit would it help? They already saw that it would happen. If they saw it would happen, it had to happen. So the Rebbe says, even in such a situation, tears are not in place. It's not the place to cry. We still need to work. For our Chachamim have already declared, even when a sharp sword is placed on a person's neck, he should not refrain from seeking Hashem's mercy. Even when a heavenly decree has been issued, it can be rent through divine service, as we find with regard to King Chizkiyahu. Yeshayahu Hanavi communicated to him the prophecy where it was decreed that Chizkiyahu would die. Chizkiyahu told Yeshayahu Hanavi, cease your prophesying and depart. Leave. We're done now. You told me, now we're done. And he turned to face the wall and he prayed to Hashem. And his prayer was effective. Hashem assured him, I have heard your prayer. And he granted him 15 more years of life, meaning an increase of life in the physical world, here in the material world. It wasn't just some spiritual way how the Eibishter answered him. So the same thing even though they saw by prophecy that it would be a situation where they would be able to, where there would be a destruction of Beis Hamikdash, they're still able to overcome it, and they're still able, with their davening, to make sure that it shouldn't be destroyed. So he says in 6, our sages state, the Chacham said, Kol dar she'ein nivna beis hamikdash b'yamav ma'alim malav ki hilu ichrivay. And every generation when the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, it is considered as if that generation was responsible for it to be destroyed. Similarly, with regard to every individual, if the Beis Hamikdash is not built in his days, the Chacham, we're talking about the generation. Here we're talking about every individual. That is a sign that his individual Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. Personally, his internal spiritual state is that he's in a state of galus. For if his own Avodas Hashem divine service, meaning his individual Beis Hamikdash, were perfect, Mashiach would come and build the actual Beis Hamikdash. The intent and the purpose is not that the contemplation of above will lead to sighing and weeping. That's not the purpose, as we said before. But rather to deed and action, bring about one's individual redemption, like Chassidus always talks about, that the person needs to have their geula pratis, their own internal redemption, and the building of the Beis Hamikdash within his own soul, within his own neshama. This in turn will hasten and draw down the greater redemption and the rebuilding of the actual Beis Hamikdash in its place by Mashiach. May this take place in the immediate future.